The Book of Zephaniah is one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. It is a brief but intense prophetic book, primarily focused on divine judgment, the coming day of the Lord, and the ultimate restoration of God's people. Zephaniah's message is one of both warning and hope, calling for repentance and promising redemption. Introduction and Judgment against Judah, Chapter 1:1-6. Zephaniah begins by introducing his genealogy and his prophecy during the reign of King Josiah of Judah, around 640 to 609 BCE. The prophet declares that God's judgment is imminent, not only for Judah but for all nations. Judah is condemned for its idolatry, syncretism, blending worship of God with pagan practices, and moral corruption. The Day of the Lord, Chapter 1:7-18. Zephaniah warns of the coming day of the Lord, a time of God's fierce anger and judgment. The day of the Lord will be marked by destruction for the wicked, including both the people of Judah and the surrounding nations. The judgment will sweep across all levels of society, from the highest to the lowest, and will include the wicked, those who turn from God, the religious hypocrites, those who worship other gods, and the proud, those who trust in their own power. Judgment on the Nations, Chapter 2:1-15. Zephaniah addresses several surrounding nations, including the Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, Ethiopians, and the Assyrians, whose capital was Nineveh. Each of these nations is warned that they too will face God's judgment because of their wickedness, pride, and oppression of God's people. The fall of Nineveh is especially highlighted, as the Assyrian Empire is a symbol of arrogance and violence. A call to repentance and hope, Chapter 3:1-7. Zephaniah calls for repentance in Judah, urging the people to seek humility and righteousness to avoid the coming wrath. The prophet also laments the stubbornness of Jerusalem and its leaders, who have failed to heed God's call. The promise of restoration, Chapter 3-8-20. After the judgment, God promises restoration and blessing for the remnant of his people. The nations that have oppressed Judah will eventually be brought to justice, and God will purify his people. The final section is filled with hope, as God promises to gather the exiles, remove their shame, and bring them into a time of peace and prosperity. Jerusalem will be restored, and God will dwell among his people, comforting them and rejoicing over them with gladness. Themes: the Day of the Lord. The central theme of Zephaniah is the Day of the Lord, a time of judgment and retribution where God's justice will be executed against the wicked. It is a day of darkness and wrath for those who oppose God, but it is also a day of purification and restoration for the faithful remnant. Judgment against idolatry and sin. Judah and the surrounding nations are condemned for their idolatry, moral corruption, and pride. Zephaniah warns that God will not tolerate these sins indefinitely, and that judgment will come for those who persist in rebellion. The call to repentance. Zephaniah calls the people of Judah to humility, repentance, and a turning back to God. Repentance is portrayed as the only way to escape judgment and find mercy in the midst of the coming destruction. Hope for the remnant. Even though Zephaniah prophesies destruction, there is a message of hope for those who remain faithful to God. God promises to restore a faithful remnant of his people, bringing them back from exile and blessing them. The ultimate restoration is not only for Israel, but it includes the nations as well, pointing to a future time when all people will come to worship God. God's sovereignty. Throughout the book, God's sovereignty over the nations is emphasized. He is in control of history and will bring about his purposes, using even foreign nations as instruments of his judgment. However, God is also portrayed as merciful and loving, desiring to gather his people and restore them. God's presence and joy over his people. In the final chapters, God's promise to be with his people is highlighted. He will dwell among them and bring them peace. The imagery of God rejoicing over his people with singing, 3:17, is one of the most striking and comforting elements of Zephaniah's prophecy. The book of Zephaniah delivers a message of serious warning about the consequences of sin, idolatry, and pride, while also offering a vision of future restoration and hope for the faithful. The central themes of judgment and hope are interwoven, showing that God's justice is not only necessary but also ultimately leads to the redemption of his people. Through repentance and trust in God, a faithful remnant will experience His restoration and blessing, and God will dwell among His people in peace.